Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Prenatal Wellness Talks. Today, we have the honor of exploring the fascinating field of prenatal and perinatal psychology with one of its true pioneers, renowned author and clinical psychiatrist, Dr. Thomas Verny. Dr. Verny's groundbreaking work has reshaped how we understand the earliest stages of human life, emphasizing how experience before and around birth can profoundly influence our lifelong health and well-being. Dr. Verny, thank you so much for being with us today. It's such a pleasure.
For having me. Thank you.
Before we dive into our conversation, could you just start by sharing a little bit about your background and what inspired you to dedicate your life's work to prenatal and perinatal psychology?
Well, did you say briefly?
There's so much that you can share, so please just.
I'm 89 years old, and so to say anything briefly at this point is rather difficult, but I will try. I was always interested in dreams. That's really what got me into psychiatry. When I was 13 years old, we spent my parents and I spent 3 years in Vienna. And so one of the first things that I read actually when I started learning German, because we came from the former Czechoslovakia, which is now Slovakia and Czechia, but at that time it was still Czechoslovakia. So I did not speak any German, but as I gradually learned how to speak German, one of the first books that I read was Freud's analysis of dreams. And it really fascinated me, and I became very interested in dreams. And then I made up my mind at the age of 13, after reading Freud, that I wanted to become a psychiatrist. And I never really sort of changed plans. After that, it was become a doctor, become a psychiatrist. And there were all kinds of difficulties on the road to becoming a psychiatrist, but to cut it short, I did become a psychiatrist. And because I continued to have an interest in dreams, I would always discuss with my patients any dreams that they had. And so one day I was sitting with one of my patients, and he started telling me about his dream. And then he suddenly started crying like a little baby. And I let him cry for about 10 minutes. And then he came out of it, so to speak. I asked him what happened. He said he found himself in a crib. He was a little baby. He found himself in a crib, and he was crying for his mother. So then he said, being a somewhat skeptical young lawyer, he said, there's something wrong with this picture that I just had, because I actually have seen photographs of myself as a baby in a crib. And they were always taken in a white crib. And just now, a minute ago, I saw myself in a blue crib. So perhaps it doesn't mean anything, but it's kind of strange. So I told him, go home. He was a young man. His parents were still alive. Ask your mother. And so he came back a week later for his regular appointment. And he told me, this is really amazing. But it seems that the first few months of my life, my parents did not have enough money to buy me a crib. And they borrowed a crib, which was white. And only after about 2 or 3 months later, they bought a crib, which was blue. And that's where all the pictures were taken. So I had no way of knowing that I ever slept in a white crib. So that gave me pause. But, I was very well educated, so to speak. I went to the University of Toronto. I went to Harvard. Everywhere I went, I was taught that children before the age 2 cannot remember anything. So this just could not exist. It couldn't exist. There was no explanation for it. So I let it go. But then, as so often happens in life, once you have sort of your ears up and you're looking around, I came across more and more stories like that of people remembering things from their birth or even pre-birth. And, I have more anecdotes like that I remembered. And then, and this is where sort of luck meets work and aptitude. One of my friends, an obstetrician, told me that there was this big conference in Rome. Every 4 years, there's a conference in Rome on International Meeting of Psychosomatic Obstetrics and Gynecology. He said, why don't you present a paper on this sort of new stuff that you are talking about children remembering their birth, all that kind of nonsense. Why don't you present a paper? People who are presenters usually get treated better, much better than just people in the audience, right? So I thought, yeah, sure. So I collected everything that I could, and we are talking 1978, many years ago. And I collected all the scientific evidence that I could muster at that time. And I wrote a paper which was called The Psychic Life of the Unborn Child. And to my total amazement, because I was totally unknown, I was just a young psychiatrist from Toronto. To my total amazement, my paper was accepted. Not only was it accepted, but it was put on the main program in the morning with R.D. Laing. I don't know whether you still remember R.D. Laing, very famous Scottish psychiatrist, lots of other very famous people. And I was nobody. But I got 20 minutes with these famous people. And so I had my 20 minutes, and I noticed that after about 10, 15 minutes, there were about 400, 500 people in the audience. They were all like electrified. You could, as a speaker, I'm sure you have had the experience that when the audience is with you and paying attention. So I noticed that. And so I said, well, if anybody in the audience wants to continue talking about this subject, come and see me at 5 o'clock, which would be end of the talks. Come and see me in room 414, and perhaps we can continue this conversation. Well, to my total amazement, there were many, many people lining up at 5 o'clock, including Ronnie Lang and Sheila Kitzinger and lots of people, names that I knew only from reading but never met. And they were all interested in talking about this. So when I came home back to Toronto, I started thinking about this subject more. And then I wrote an outline for a book, which was called The Psychic Life of the Unborn Child. To make a long story short, the book was successfully eventually published by Simon & Schuster, a huge publishing house in New York. They changed the title because The Psychic Life sounded too California off the wall. They changed it to The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And because this was now 1981, I think, Simon & Schuster had lots of money to spend on publicity. And so they sent me all across the country, one day in every city, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, like every city. And from morning till night, I was on television, I was on radio interviews, I was doing newspaper, magazine interviews. So naturally, the book became a bestseller. And so here I was, very lucky. And then in terms of what happened next was that I was in Los Angeles, And I met David Chamberlain, who I'm sure you have heard of, and he was a psychologist, and he had done some investigations of what people remembered about their birth. So the two of us had a very successful meeting, and we were both on the same page in terms of believing that we had a lot of evidence to show that children really did remember what happened to them at birth and perhaps even prior to birth. And so he and I decided to offer a paper at the American Psychological Association meeting every year, once a year. And of course, the paper was rejected because it just, wasn't acceptable to say this, Uh, and so when it got rejected, David and I spoke on the telephone because he was living in California. And I said, well, why don't we form our own association? And he said, okay. And so, without computers, without anything, I started organizing the first international congress on what I call pre and perinatal psychology in Toronto. And then that became a huge success. And then we founded the Association for the North American Association for Pre and Perinatal Psychology, which then later became APA, the Association for Pre and Perinatal Psychology and Health. But David and I formed the association with some other people. And then a year later, I got us a publishing house to publish our scientific journal. And the association has been running ever since. So that's my story.
Yes, and that was a groundbreaking step when you founded APA that still exists in our days and is one of the partners of Prenatal Alliance. What was that first vision that you had at the time for the association, and how do you see that impact today?
Well, the vision that I had that time, and I think that that has really materialized, is to set up a scientific association, as strictly scientific as the American Psychological Association or the American Medical Association, Canadian Medical Association, whatever you have, a scientific association that would look into the science of pre and perinatal psychology. Psychology is not really quite the right term for it, because we are really doing more than psychology, but it's really the best term that we can use, because what our association is doing, nobody else was doing, which was looking at what sort of psychological and environmental and biological factors will affect pregnancy, but not only the biology of pregnancy, whether women will have a placenta previa, or whether they will have high blood pressure, or whether there's going to be a problem with the child, but how it affects the psychological development of the child. So there was no other association, and there isn't any other association that looks into the prenatal factors that will affect your psychological development. And of course, the psychological development is very much rooted in physiological development. Obviously, the brain is very important. And so I think my vision then has not changed. What has changed, I will tell you what has changed in my mind, what has changed. What has changed is that when I started the association and when I wrote The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, we had a lot of evidence to show that the unborn child, let's say from the end of the second trimester, after 6 months in utero, was a feeling, sensing, sensate, remembering little human being. lot of evidence. And of course, that evidence has grown exponentially. And the effect of stress on the mother and all that kind of stuff. But what bothered me for a long time was the fact that every once in a while, I would hear people telling me about events that happened to them before the end of the second trimester. In other words, right back to conception. And what was the explanation for that? Like there was no good scientific, because I've always leaned on science, not stories, not anecdotes, right? What is the scientific evidence? How can we explain someone remembering their conception? I mean, there's no brain there, right? So where is the information? And so about 10 years ago, because things are going back now quite a bit, about 10 years ago, I read in one of the medical journals about a Frenchman in his 40s. I forgot exactly how old he was, but let's say about his 40s, who had a bit of weakness in his left leg. And he went to a hospital to be investigated. And to everybody's surprise, they also did x-rays of his head. They found that he had virtually no brain. He only had a thin crust of brain tissue, and the rest of his skull, where the brain should be, was full of fluid, cerebrospinal fluid. And this man was married. He had 2 children. He was gainfully employed in the French civil service. Now, how can a person with virtually no brain do this? And so that started just like that first dream when the man started crying like a little baby. That started me thinking. And so I started investigating again, reading everything I could. And I found out that there were lots of people in the world with half a brain, sometimes with hardly any brain. Many of them did not function well, but some of them did. And how to explain that? So that's when I got on the path of cellular intelligence. And so what I found, and it's a hypothesis which I have put out in The Embodied Mind, the book that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yes, before we started this interview, I talked about your last book, The Embodied Mind, Understanding the Mysteries of Cellular Memory, Consciousness, and Our Body. So it is this subject that will lead you then to writing this book.
Right. So that's when I again started doing research. I read 5,000 books and journals to back up, to find evidence for this. And then I wrote the book, The Embodied Mind. And I do believe that all the cells in our bodies together, jointly, are very much involved in memory. And, one of the best examples of that is, for example, heart transplants. And we have histories of donors giving their heart to a recipient, and the recipient suddenly acquiring some very important personality characteristics of the donor, and without ever knowing anything about the donor. And so there are quite a number of these reports in the literature. And how is that possible unless it is through the cells of the heart that some of that information has been transmitted? So in my book, I give a lot of examples of that. And so I think that explains, going back to what we said 10 minutes ago, that explains why some people are able to remember things that happened to them right at conception. And it also explains why some people have been affected what happened to their parents and grandparents, because some of that information is transmitted genetically through the ova and the sperm. which also can carry information. So this gets us into a whole new area of pre and perinatal psychology. And I think it's a fascinating new area.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And another thing that also is brought up in your book is about the connection between the brain and the body. Because before we would understand psychology just as a matter of the brain, like as if we could heal and be separated of the body. But then you're talking about somatics and how they are part of the same system. Can you talk a little bit about that also?
You know, we have for hundreds of years, perhaps thousands of years, we have really lived in a male-dominated society. And so male-dominated societies, patriarchal societies, are very much hierarchical. And so it's the head of the family, the head of the clan, right? Who is, the head mistress in, in a school, the head nurse, head, head, head. And that has also consciously, unconsciously, whatever, been influential in terms of science. So science has also been hierarchical and has naturally, without even thinking about it, put all its emphasis on the head, and not just the head, but what is in the head, the brain, right? So we have become totally focused on the brain. Even when people talk about psychosomatics, which has been, fairly popular, let's say the last 50, 60 years, whatever, people always talk about the troubles that the body gives you instead of the troubles that the head gives you. So we talk about ulcers, right? And we talk about heart problems. And we never talk about how the body actually regulates the head, and then the head regulates the body. It's, it's a reverberating system. And it is, let's say, your anxiety, which might create problems in terms of your gut. But on the other hand, your gut microbiome, which is all the bacteria and viruses and all that stuff that resides in your gut, if that is not healthy, it is going to send toxic signals to the head, and then the head will send more toxic signals to the body, the heart. It's all connected. It's all connected. For example, just yesterday, there was a research article on the fact that autistic children have an unhealthy microbiome. And so it's very difficult to say which came first. But the fact is that they coexist, and that for the longest time, people have always put all their focus on the brain and not enough focus on the body, which has tremendous implications for health. I mean, the microbiome is a beautiful example of how important it is to have diverse bacteria in your gut. There's even one research which showed that elderly people who have a diverse microbiome are more social and therefore less lonely. And we all know how bad loneliness is on your psyche. Now, on the other hand, if you have just a microbiome which is very limited, you will get more lonely, you will get sicker, you will suffer of all kinds of diseases which you would not if you ate a more diverse diet. So, like, diet is incredibly important, and it has nothing to do with the brain.
Yeah, and now you are talking about behavior aspects, not just in terms of health and disease, but also in terms of how we are and maybe how we are perceiving the world. One of the things that you have always touched in prenatal psychology is how the mother perceives the world outside gives insight to the baby of how the world it is, because we can have two mothers that have went through the same situation, but with different inner experiences affecting the baby. You want to talk a little bit about that also?
I don't think I can put it any better than you have. No, yeah, of course. I mean, everything that the mother eats, drinks, inhales, everything that she thinks, all those things, what she says, all those things affect the baby. And so it is so important, you know. I think you were interested in, you know, one of the main messages that I want to leave behind. And I think that one of the main messages, there are probably more than one, but one of the main messages that I really want to put out into the world is the importance of communicating with your unborn child, communicating in a positive, loving, caring way, both for the mother and the father. May I tell you a little story about that? It's one of my favorites. Are you originally from South America? May I ask you?
No, I'm from Portugal.
Portugal. Okay, close. So Brazil, have you been to Brazil?
No, but we have very deep connections with Brazil, certainly.
So do I. Yes. So I love Brazil. I love Argentina. I love Chile. I'm very comfortable in South America. Yeah. But anyway, yes. So, yes, I was going to tell you this story. So when I was lecturing in Brazil, um, one of the women there told me that when she was first pregnant, um, her husband was studying medicine and he was hardly ever home. 4 years later, she became pregnant again and he was home. And he would talk to my baby every night, she said. Oh, I said, well, what would he say? Oh, just hi, Junior. How you doing? It's a really nice day today. We just had dinner. We're going to watch a little bit of TV and then we'll all go to sleep. Stuff like that. Good. Okay. So then the baby was born and the woman continued. And then my husband came into the birthing room and he approached my baby, who was a boy, approached my son and he said, Hi, Junior. And my baby just looked at him and gave him this beautiful smile of recognition. Like there was no doubt about it, she said, that he recognized her. The interesting PS is that now, a few years later, the relationship between this son and my husband is so much better than the relationship between my firstborn and my husband. And I'm sure, she said, that it's because of prenatal bonding. So I really think, like, there's no doubt about it. And even if you have 1,000 people out there who don't believe in prenatal bonding and and think that it's stupid to talk to your unborn child, what have you got to lose?
Yeah,
just do
exactly.
it. Just do it, and you will see the results. So I really, really believe that talking to your unborn child by both the mother and father, doesn't have to be any scientific discussion. You don't want to teach them algebra. You just want to be able to communicate that you look forward to seeing them once they come out into the world and that you love them already. That's all they need to say.
And Dr. Thomas Verny, over the years, you have been such a great inspiration for not only for mothers and parents, but also for professionals in your talks, in your books. Can you tell us what has been more rewarding in your personal journey that you are still doing?
Well, I think what has been most rewarding is how associations like yours, the one, let's say, in Greece by Olga Guni, the one in France, the one in Brazil. Uh, there are all these organizations that are all supporting pre and perinatal psychology, really, and APA, of course, has grown hugely. There's a great deal of interest in India. There's a great deal of interest in Japan. Uh, all over the world, there are people that we know or don't even know they're doing this. And when I started, like there was David Chamberlain and I and a few people, and that's it. And now, virtually 50 years later, we have all these people, thousands perhaps, doulas and people like yourself, who are carrying on this work. And that has been incredibly rewarding because when I wrote the book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, I had no idea that it would take off like this. Okay. Like I would have been happy if I had just seen it being published. But it has been an incredible success. And what really matters, of course, is not the success of the book, but that the ideas have taken root and are being magnified. And there are a lot of people who have been affected by it, and they don't even know where it's coming from.
And I must say that still today, when I talk with moms or when I talk with friends in my work, and I talk about your research and what we have learned of the influence that the mother has in her baby, but not only that, how some of our behaviors can be translated about our experience that we had in our own womb, they are still quietly
Critical.
listening, and they can't. It's very interesting because it opens highways, brain highways within themselves. They feel, I'm starting to understand what is happening to me, but I've never heard about it. And I said, but there's a lot of research out there. Now you can just look up on the internet. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of books, very interesting, about human behavior related to the prenatal experience and also to the birth experience. And this is definitely a topic that people are very welcoming and very open to receive the knowledge and the wisdom that you started in this movement. In Prenatal Alliance, we work mostly with education. We think that it's very important that this information reaches not only the general public, but it's right there since the beginning of our development in schools, in universities, in professional training. And I would like to know your opinion on how this could transform the way society understands pregnancy, birth, and the early human development.
Well, I think that it has been, when I started, uh, I received a huge amount of criticism from, from the establishment, right? Psychologists, obstetricians, nurses, um, a lot of, a lot of the professionals um, made fun of these ideas. Um, I find nowadays that it has become quite accepted. Um, when I started 1981, 82, I would go on television shows, etc. And usually I would be I or my work would be introduced as controversial. Here are Dr. Verny's, some people might think, controversial ideas. Okay, I don't get that anymore. I don't get that anymore. And so that has been good. Okay, that's really good for the world. I don't care about myself, but it has been good for the world. It has made no, it's not quite true that I don't care about myself, but I care more about the fact that it has been, good for thousands of unborn children, perhaps millions, I don't know. So that has been great, and I love to see that, and I, um, I can say that I have done my work.
You certainly have inspired a lot of us to continue the work that you are doing. And I'm so happy that you were able to be with us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas Verny. I hope this will not be the only interview that we do, and that we have more time for other aspects of your work to be introduced also to our audience. Thank you so much for this wonderful time, Dr. Thomas.
Great, and wish you the best of luck in everything that you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you.